Waiting one more minute. Oh, it's 12:05 on my computer, so I am going to go ahead and get started. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think we will have some more people trickling in. We had about 19 registrants. So welcome to the second in our series of webinars in honor of our AAPI Heritage Month of May. This is a collaborative effort between AAVMP and MCVMA, and I'm really pleased to be your moderator today. My name is Kaori Sakamoto. I'm an anatomic pathologist and professor at the University of Georgia. I'm also the director of wellness and well-being for the AAVMP, as well as president-elect starting in July. So welcome, everybody. I'm so pleased to introduce this wonderful panel to you all. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So Angie Arora is a South Asian social worker supporting the human needs that arise from human-animal relationships, specializing in veterinary well-being, end-of-life, pet loss support, and equity issues within veterinary medicine. As a certified compassion fatigue specialist and mental health and well-being coach, she provides trauma-informed support to help animal care providers foster self and community connection so they can reconnect to themselves and their work in new and improved ways. In addition to her private practice focused on well-being coaching and training, she teaches at Seneca College and is actively involved in relevant veterinary medicine initiatives with organizations including Blend Vet and VA Canada, the Toronto Zoo, and various veterinary hospitals. Welcome, Angie. Our second panelist is Sharon Fornes, who's a registered vet tech and a VTS in anesthesia and analgesia, as well as having an MBA. She began at VCA as the Regional Technician Training Coordinator of the San Francisco Northeast Bay Area in 2015, and she's now Talent Acquisitions Partner for all Northern California hospitals since April of 2021. And prior to joining VCA, she was an instructor at Carrington College for 17 years. Her last 4 years of teaching, she was the program director of the San Leandro campus. Her experience in the field includes anesthesia, surgery, research, emergency and critical care, exotics, and as a vet tech instructor. And then finally, Dr. Marie Sato-Quixel is a small animal general practitioner and acupuncturist. She's a mixed race Japanese American and has been involved in diversity, equity, inclusion work since she was a veterinary student. She's a founding board member, past president, and current treasurer of the Multicultural Veterinary Medical Association. Thank you so much, y'all, for joining me today. So I'm going to start off with Angie. Could you tell us what work-life balance means to you, and maybe include some of your hobbies or fun facts in there too?
Sure, sounds good. So I think we've all heard the phrase work-life balance. I would imagine as everyone starts to share, we all see that we have really just kind of personal definitions of what that means. I think for me, before I kind of define it in my own words, I think that what's important for me is recognizing that it is never the same throughout my life. And it really ebbs and flows depending on what season of life that I'm in at that moment and what my competing priorities and demands are. I think how I've conceptualized it is I know that I'm in a state of balance when my own personal needs are being met, regardless of what is going on around me in my work life. And I think about that also just in context of not like personal over here and work over here, but how am I attending to my own needs even throughout the day while I'm at work? And so I don't really see them as these separate entities of work and personal life, but this enmeshment of both. And so for me, just like really practicing different parts of self-care throughout my workday also helps me to achieve a quote unquote balance, because then at the end of my day, I'm not totally crashing and then not able to enjoy any of the time that I actually do have to myself. So just to kind of bring that together, cycles, never static, always changing. Like if I even think about my life in the last, 5 years, what that's looked like and how I've had to adjust to achieving the balance has looked really, really different all throughout those 5 years. Curious to hear. Yeah, for sure.
For me, work-life balance is just having something outside of work so that I could be more productive at work. For me, I do a lot of fitness stuff. My primary things are cycling and working out, going for walks with my little dog Lulu. And those are the things that I think help me to keep, if I can take care of myself, then I can take care of work better because I'm not concentrating on those things while I'm at work. So I think that's kind of a really helpful thing to keep me in check and keep me in line.
Yeah, I think for me it's just making sure that I am checking in with myself to make sure that I don't feel overwhelmed in any particular part. I think I'm one of those people that always feels like they need to be doing something and working towards something, and just making sure I take the time to do things that are not necessarily um, building to something, but just fun and taking care of myself. And so for me, my biggest one is I'm a huge ice hockey player and fan. So making sure I take time and prioritize that and prioritize, spending time with my kids. I have two small kids that have an abundance of energy. And making sure that it's not just only focusing on making sure that all their needs are met, that they're, getting right sleep and getting their schoolwork done and all that, but making sure I take time to have fun with them too. And make sure that that's a priority as well. So it's definitely challenging to bounce between all of those, but doing things that are just fun and stress relieving and not focusing always on accomplishing something big and important.
Taking the time during the day and giving yourself permission to take breaks. One thing I wanted to add personally is finding things in your work that also fill your cup. So, not just continuing in a line of work or a job where you just feel like, you're at the salt mines, but finding something to do in your work that's really fulfilling. For me, that's a lot of the wellness, DEI, professional skills stuff that I do in the curriculum. That really makes me happy. So it doesn't just feel like work. So, which is really nice. Before I forget, I just want to tell our audience, feel free to place questions in the chat or raise your hand in the reaction section. If you want to ask a question, feel free to interrupt us at any time. All right, so I'm going to start with Sharon this time with our next question, which is that a lot of times our audience members who watch these webinars are still in school. And so were there specific periods in your life during which you maybe felt more or less balanced? How did schooling fit into that? Was that part of when you did feel like you had a good balance?
I'll answer that last question because I think it kind of encapsulates everything about going to school, that I think if I were to redo it, I would do it a little bit different. Going to school, I think I hyper focused on going to school, made that the priority, and then didn't have that work-life balance. So a lot of things were out of whack at that point in time. I mean, I used to love to read for fun, and I find myself now that because I read so much throughout school, it was just constantly research and reading, and that I don't do recreational reading any longer. And that's something that was a goal of mine this year, is to find books that were not scientific, that were not going to be for work, and just enjoy reading once again. So I find I still have trouble with that. Every time I pick up a book, within a half hour, I'm asleep because I'm like, I'm not learning anything. So yeah, work-life balance was really hard. I found a lot of times I would ignore friends and family in order to accomplish schooling, because was just so challenging. And then when I became a program director, I had a lot of students that were having very similar problems. And I started to heed the words that I was telling them was, schedule your time so that you can have time for your family. Schedule it into your day, just like you schedule in studying, just like you schedule in going to the gym. Schedule in time with your family, or for those of you who really need it, that downtime, schedule in that time where you are just doing nothing, where you're, reading a book, going on a walk, or even, my passion is Netflix, right? I just can sit there and Netflix binge for a while. So those are the things that I kind of take away from that work-life balance that needs to be in alignment. When you're doing something that's really hard, you need to find the things in the world to enjoy. Well, I just finished jury duty, and that was really kind of funny. But yeah, I highly recommend that one. It's on Prime for free if you can get it. Yeah.
Cool. I'm watching Midnight Diner, which is a Japanese series. It's really interesting. If anyone's curious, it is with subtitles though, unless you are fluent in Japanese. But anyway, going to Marie.
Yeah, I think being a student was hard because when I was in vet school, just like most students, you've worked so hard to get there, and it's been a goal for so long that you kind of feel the need to be doing it all the time. And then if you start to feel burned out, then sometimes you feel a little guilty, like, man, I worked so hard to get here. And now I'm feeling burned out. And I think there's some guilt associated with that, and then makes us want to kind of do more. For me, I was fortunate that I didn't have to work a job when I was in vet school. So, and I didn't have my children yet, so I didn't have those outside pressures that I could focus on school. And even then it was hard not to overcommit. I think that's a issue of mine that I've been trying to work on. But I still tried to find that time for myself and make a commitment for that. And like I said, I play ice hockey. And I think that in addition to it being something that I absolutely love doing, I have teammates that are relying on me to show up to games. And so I'm accountable to someone else as well. And it's regularly put in my schedule. So it helped me kind of commit to something outside of school that, I enjoy doing, but also, like I said, I'm held accountable, and it's blocked in my calendar. So I know that that's a time that I need to do that. I felt like right after I graduated, I wasn't doing as much studying and stuff, but, being a new grad is so stressful adjusting to practice. I went straight into clinical practice. But I think that the small window I had after the first couple of years of practice, where I started to feel more comfortable and I didn't feel like, deer in the headlights new grad all the time. But before I had my kids, I definitely had some more free time. And for a lot of people, they probably would have thought of that as more balance, but then I started to get the itch to do more. So that, and look for more and look for ways to do new things. I think that's I think a lot of veterinarians and people in vet med are very driven that way. And I needed something else to work towards. So, that's how I got involved in volunteer work with MCVMA, and I did some coaching and stuff like that. So I think it's easy to overcommit, and trying to make sure that we don't get carried away is very challenging in vet school and beyond. Thank you.
How about you, Angie?
I actually just want to even just respond, Sharon. You talked about that piece with the reading and the books. I hear that a lot, I've heard that a few times over the last few months from some folks that I've been coaching. And it's really interesting, right? Because listen, I've never been to vet school, so I don't know the realities of what you went through in that. I can only imagine. But this piece on being stuck on this on position, and the way it even just starts to shift our habits and the way that we think, it makes a lot of sense that the memories that brings up is, I subconsciously don't even want to touch it. But I'll share just something personal on, in my line of work, I'm supporting others through these things, but just to humanize this, I'm in a season of my life right now where my work-life balance is really, really hard. This is probably kind of the toughest spot that I've been in a long time. And so I think sometimes when we're talking about work-life balance, we just got to recognize that it's hard. And I find for myself, the more balls that I'm juggling at the same time, the more my energy just becomes really hard to manage. And so, Marie and Sharon, as you were talking about scheduling the time, I love that, because if we don't schedule it, we're probably not going to make time for it. And it made me also think about, how are we balancing our energy throughout the day? There's time, and then there's also energy. Like, how many coins am I spending right from the moment that I wake up, even before the time I get to work? And I'm really starting to more consciously pay attention to how I'm replenishing those coins throughout my day. Because I can't, and for many of us, we can't change the fact that we do have a lot of balls that we're juggling. For students in school, for new grads, paying off debt, having kids, all that sort of stuff. It's part of, we can't control all of it. And so, like, how do we manage ourselves throughout the day? For me, it's just so much about the micro moments. Like, it may sound like, like even just closing my eyes and getting some sensory rest. If I can even just stick my head out the window for 2 minutes and feel the sun on my face, just those, and I think it's about doing them consciously, right? So if you're going to go for a walk, do it mindfully and really just like pay attention and soak it all up. That for me has been my saving grace as I juggle all these different balls.
The balls drop, right? Like, I miss a meeting, something doesn't get in my calendar, I double book, like, then I know I have to take a deep breath, step back, maybe, cut out some obligations that aren't quite so important. Oh, Krista has a question. Please go ahead, Krista.
Hi, everyone. So I'm currently a vet student out here in Ireland, and I was just I love this topic because it's funny because I'm in finals season right now, so I really feel that stress of like not being able to juggle anything, because I don't think I have left my room for like 3 days straight trying to study for like cardio and respiratory. Yeah, but anyway, I was just wondering, like, it's easy for like, because like two of you guys or a couple of you guys are vets now, so it's easy to look back and be like, like maybe I should have spent more time like enjoying myself, or like, it wouldn't have mattered that much if I didn't study like 24/7. Like, I mean, is that the case, or like, do you think anything would have changed if you guys would have just let loose and like done more enjoyable things, I guess?
So I think I have a slightly unique perspective to this, because during my undergrad, I actually prioritized the fun stuff too much. So I partied really hard, barely graduated on time, almost failed out, like totally went off the deep end. And so it was with that perspective that I kind of got my act together, and by the time I got to vet school, I feel like I had my priorities a little more straight and balanced. So I didn't kill myself studying to the point where I would get straight A's. Like, that was okay. Like, I was older and wiser in vet school than a lot of my classmates who went straight through, since I worked and done a master's before then and everything. So I wasn't hell-bent on the whole 4.0 thing. But I also knew what it was like to fail spectacularly. So I wasn't going to go there either. So I think that really helped me find that line, to enjoy myself, and yet not to the detriment of learning. So I think it's a uniquely individual decision, right? How much you study versus how much you play, and whatever keeps both sides healthy, I think. But I think this might be one that Angie should take. What do you think?
I actually think Marie and Sharon, I mean, you've both been through more relevant schooling I can't really put myself in the shoes of, how I love your question, Krista, just on like how much of a difference would it have made? I'm actually really curious to hear from Sharon and Marie on this.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was in vet school, my third year, which is, right when you're getting ready to go into clinics and stuff, like I definitely overcommitted and was doing way too many things. I wanted to take all the electives. I was president of my voice chapter, and I was trying to make sure that and I was the founding president. I started the chapter. I was president for 3 years. I want to make sure it continued beyond when I went to clinics. I was secretary of another club. Like, I was doing way too much, and it was stressing me out. And I found that and then I wanted to do all the studying and things like that. And I found that when I took those breaks, instead of studying for 10 hours straight, like I'm at, hours like 7, 8, 9, 10, I'm not absorbing as much. And so just doing the studying because you feel I need to study X amount of hours, but if it's not being productive, is not as helpful. And so, I'm one of those people that, and this might be a rarity, I don't drink coffee. So I'm not one of those people that uses a lot of caffeine. I've never pulled an all-nighter to study because I feel like it's really important to have, a break and get good sleep before a test or school. So I found that it was better if I took breaks and I spent less time studying, but my studying was more quality. And so I used to like to like set little goals for myself and make sure I had those breaks. I'd be like, all right, I'm gonna study until the end of this chapter, and then I'm gonna get up and take my dog for a walk for 10 minutes, and then I'm gonna come back, and after the next chapter, I'm gonna get up and make myself a cup of tea, and break things up a little bit. And I found that I absorbed things better if I had time to process a little bit, versus just sitting there and reading the notes or rewriting my notes over and over again. And at a certain point, it's saturated. So I think there's a lot of pressure in school because people are like, oh yeah, I pulled all-nighters for this midterm, or, I studied, like I went home and I studied until 1 a.m. And it's almost like a bragging contest on how badly we can treat ourselves while we're studying. And so I felt like there was some pressure there, and I just had to go, that's not something I want to do, and it's not effective for me. If other people feel like they need to do that, then I'm going to let them do what they do. But for me, I felt like I did better when I took those breaks and I gave myself time to process and make sure that I was actually absorbing and not sitting in room for 3 days, which I can understand the temptation to do that. But I think, getting out and walking around may be a better option for a little while at least.
Great. Sharon, did you want to comment before we address Tina's question in the chat?
I think I have kind of the same thing between Marie and Cora, that when I was going to school, a lot of times I had partied all through my 20s into my mid-20s, and then I went to school late. I went to school after I got out of the Army. I was 24 years old when I started tech school, and the partying was out of my system a little bit by then. And so I found it was very easy for me to concentrate on just schooling. But then when I was going for my master's degree, like life was happening. I was, working 8 to 10 hours a day. And I was also, had family and friends that had expectations of me going out and doing the same things I was always doing. So it was hard to find that work-life balance, but just like Marie, I would say, okay, if you finish X chapter, then you can go have drinks with your friends or go to lunch. Or so the reward system is do the things that you have to do, and then you get to go have fun, rather than the reverse is, I'm going to have fun, and then, I have to go and do this other thing. Another thing I found was beneficial is getting that 8 hours of sleep. And I read a study somewhere along the lines where if you study or you pull those all-nighters, that information doesn't stick with you as well as if you study the information, get your 8 hours of sleep, and then you can recall that information. And I think that's more important, especially when you're learning something like veterinary medicine, where it builds on itself. So you can't forget what you learned last week, because you're going to need it again next semester. So those were kind of the tips that I took away from that, is like, what's the benefit of learning something if you just learn it for the test and forget about it, but actually learning it for it to sink in, it has to be meaningful. So that's one of the things that I took away from not pulling all-nighters.
My time for sleep like that's huge. So Krista, I don't know what time it is there, but thanks for joining us, but don't stay up too late. Okay. All right. So Tina asked in the chat, as members of the AAPI community, do you feel there are any aspects of work-life balance that impact you differently compared to others? And that was actually one of our questions anyway. So Marie, did you want to take this first?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely feel like that has an impact. I think, it creates different expectations, both within my family and from others. So, my dad is Japanese, and he was your typical work 60 hours a week my entire childhood, always having to do like business trips and taking clients out and stuff like that. And it was hard because I didn't get to see him as much as I wanted. When he was home, he was very engaged and, did all kinds of stuff with me and my brother when we were kids. But, I wish he would have been around more, so we could have done more of those things and he wouldn't have had such high stress levels. And so I think that was an expectation, and that, working all the time is expected, and having those kinds of commitments is expected. And I definitely wanted to try and make sure that I worked hard, but I wasn't giving too much of myself to a job or a career, so I could be there more for my kids, and the way that I wish my dad had been around a little bit more. The other thing that I found is that because I'm Asian American, and I found this throughout my schooling, is that people just had an anticipation that it was easy for me, that, oh, you're Asian, you're smart, you're good at taking tests, you don't have to work as hard as the rest of us. And so there's this expectation that I was always going to do well and make it look effortless, and which I always felt was unfair. And then if I did do well, it was never, oh, good job, you worked hard. It was, oh, well, yeah, you're Asian, of course you got an A, you're Asian, it's easy for you. And so I think that expectation was always frustrating for me. So I think that those pressures definitely were at play, and it was additional factors that I had to push against to try and give myself some better balance.
Yeah, I'm so leaning into what you're saying there, Marie. I think also just, in my experience, my parents immigrated from India to Canada right when I was born. So I've spent most of my life here. But the immigrant experience and like what that does for those of us that have grown up in immigrant families, I think it plays a big role here. I know every family's circumstances are different, but for families that are coming because they quote unquote see the future for a better life, quote unquote, for their kids, whether it's Canada, America, that pressure really permeated throughout my growing up and even into my adult life, like in ways that I never had language to put to it. And if I think back in growing up, the sacrifices that my parents made to come to Canada, we were reminded of those sacrifices often. And it was never done like in an ill-intentioned way, but it created a high degree of pressure. We left this, and this because we want you and your sister to have a different kind of life here. And that influenced sort of, when I made a decision to go into social work, that was not really widely accepted by my family because they had other visions of where they wanted me to go. That pressure on making money, right, which I was not making as a social worker, were just like I could hear it in the comments that my parents and my families would say. So it has only been like in, the latter part of my adulthood where I've been able to step back and make sense of that. But I think so many of us are just living it with that unspoken pressure And again, it's no fault of our parents. They were doing the best that they could, and they had good intentions. But it can lead us into this place of not following the careers that we want to follow. Or if we do we have the full support of our families when we're doing that? And I'll just kind of throw out there too, there's actually some new research that's come out that's talked about something called the immigrant paradox. And it basically, in simple terms, is saying, despite our parents and our community's best intentions, we're now starting to see a bit of a decline in employment and educational opportunities for children of immigrant families, which I don't know all the exact reasons why, but I think we can start to see, right? Like the intergenerational poverty, the intergenerational racism, but also this piece on the pressure, I think is doing a number on people that we're not really talking about. Yeah.
Look into that. How about you, Sharon?
So my mom is Okinawan, and so we had and she met my father. So, needless to say, we were military family. So we moved to the United States. I was born here. I was raised here. We moved back to Okinawa for 2 years, and then we moved back to the States. And the whole time, my mom tried to raise us American, yet she still had her Japanese values. And that a lot of times was hard work, taking care of others, an altruism that I feel like kind of I bring forward in my work a lot of times. So I'm grateful to have that. But at the same time, I think there is that burden that you have to work hard and you have to do all of these things that I kind of in my 20s fought against was, well, why should I have to work hard? But, things are happening, I'm still making money and everything like that. So I didn't work as hard as I could have. Nowadays, I think I'm paying homage a little bit more to my heritage, a little bit more, and bringing back some of those things that I've forgotten about and bringing that back into my life and being more grateful, being Asian American, understanding the diversity that we have in this world. It's not just being akin to other Asians, but all races, and being acceptant of them in a way that with the Asian heritage, it wasn't. It's a little harder to just be focused on your race and your people. It's also being acceptant of other people as well. So when it comes to being part of the Asian American family, like Marie was saying, it's really hard because sometimes it's just taken for granted that you're going to excel and you're going to be better because you're Asian. And then when you don't, there's also a certain amount of pressure that not only do you put on yourself, but the community puts on you for why aren't you doing better? So that's a hard thing to work against. But if you know what your goals are, it doesn't matter what other people are saying about you. It's what you can bring to the table that's going to be important. What your goals are going to be, that's important, I think, for myself. And it doesn't matter what heritage you have.
Are both from Japan, so I was the first generation born here, and they had already topped out. They were both dentists and PhDs, and they were doing research at Harvard. Like I wasn't gonna be able to surpass that, right? And so I've really it's been a struggle that I think only at the tender age of 53 I've been able to kind of let go. Because I just have discovered that I really don't like research all that much. And they put a tremendous amount of pressure on me growing up to go into research. First to be a medical doctor, but then to also do some kind of biomedical research. And yeah, my interests are elsewhere. And so, first I had to convince them that vet med was a reasonable profession to go into. And then I had to explain to them why pathology was important and worthwhile and difficult. And so, yeah, it's definitely been a struggle, but I think I'm finally at the point where I'm just happy where I am and with what I'm doing. So it's okay. So we have another question about, we kind of covered some of these through that last question. Angie had touched on how she's sort of in a season in her life where things are, the balance is a little bit off. So I was just curious how Sharon and Marie are doing right now. Are you guys in a season where you feel like you can prioritize things in a way that you're happy with? Or we'll start with Sharon.
I feel like I have the ability to be balanced, but not always the mindset to be balanced. I just purchased a new home and I have my own office, whereas my office was in the room, was in a room where I was also sleeping. Now it's in a separate room. So at night I get to close the door when I'm done and I don't think about what's in that office, but I do, but I try not to. And it's easier because I get to close that door and just forget about it for a little bit. So it's a struggle. It's always a struggle to go and be in balance because there's always something that wants to pull you back towards doing either having too much fun and not having the balance of that work, or having too much work and not getting to have that fun that keeps you in that balance. So yeah, it's just a mindset. You have to work at it just like anything else in this life.
How about you, Marie?
Yeah, so I think I'm probably coming out of the most difficult time in my life as far as for work-life balance. When the pandemic started, I have, two small children that are just under 2 years apart in age. And so dealing with the pandemic and the uncertainty, and especially having small children that were, under 5 when this started. So, worries about, when vaccines happen, when are they going to be able to get it, continuing to work full time through the pandemic. And then my work with MCVMA, I felt like I really needed to dedicate time to that, to feel like I was doing something to have an impact as we were dealing with the pandemic and the increase in anti-Asian hate and the death of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement. I felt like I really needed to do something with that. And so I overcommitted. So trying to do all the things, work and dealing with the stress of the pandemic and an online kindergarten for a child with ADHD that has the energy of a husky puppy who I love dearly, but it was very, very challenging fortunately, my husband works from home. So he was super supportive, but I definitely got out of balance during all of that and overcommitted. And so I've been really working the last, year and a half or so to try and pull back on some of my commitments to make sure that when I am committing, I can give my time and my energy fully to that thing instead of, doing it halfway for multiple things. And I think I'm getting closer to that. I still have 2 very active kids to chase around and a full-time job in my work with MCVMA, but I'm trying to be better about setting those boundaries and try and get back to feeling a little bit more balanced, but still feeling like I'm contributing to veterinary medicine and my community.
Thank you. Angie, did you want to expand a little bit more on this season?
Yeah, and it's the competing demands. I've got a little one at home as well, which I think just your energy gets spread in so many different ways, especially when they're young. I have my full-time job. My full-time job doesn't even touch all the other stuff that I'm doing in vet med. So it's a lot. However, it is a lot. I also know that this period that I'm in is temporary. And so the reminders of that are helpful, knowing I'm not going to be living at this pace forever. And sometimes there just has to be competing demands. But what I've really been leaning into more recently is obviously my self-work, but also, I'm a big believer that we heal and grow in our families and in our communities. So I'm really just trying to tap into the resources that I have. For example, with my parents who live really close by, they help like once or twice a week with my son. Even just something as simple as asking my partner for help, which has been something that I've really resisted for a long time, but that kind of also speaks to my own perfectionism tendencies and like, no, I can do this all. I don't need anybody's help. That no longer works for me. And it's actually been a really beautiful process to bring in support from others because it's also their way of showing me love. And I'm there for them whenever they need it. And so that's also been a bit of my own kind of healing work and understanding what my resistance to seeking help has been. And I'm just doing it slowly. And it's allowing me to buy back even just a little bit of time for myself, whether that means getting a little bit more work done, which makes me feel better, or if it means I have a 30-minute transition between my work and when I need to get to my son, just to kind of like do the things that make me feel good and reset. So yeah, I think that the individual skills are important, and like learning how to, fill our own cup and take care of ourselves is important. And recognizing not everybody has the same support, like the same support network when there are parts that we can turn into. I think that's also really important. It's been helping me tons.
Well, I am thankfully in a really good place right now as far as headspace. But this is after crawling out of like a year of horrible burnout last year, overcommitting and being a bit disillusioned by things in our administration at our college and stuff like that. Just a lot of things piled on top of each other and additional responsibilities at work. But I'm getting better about establishing boundaries at work and carving out my time and taking better care of myself. So yeah, things are much better now. So yeah, definitely ebbs and flows all the time. But I wanted to touch back on, you had brought up perfectionism, Angie, and one of the questions that you had donated to our panel was, is there a connection between perfectionism and work-life balance? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll just share, like, these are just my thoughts, and I'd be curious to hear what others have to say as well. I mean, just in my own training and work, like when we think of perfectionism, I think in society, it's sort of just become labeled as a personality trait, but that's not really what it is. It's kind of like this subconscious coping mechanism that we learn throughout our lives, right? And for all of us, the reasons for where that perfectionism comes from is going to be really different. For me, exploring where the perfectionism has come from has been really liberating, because the more I can understand, like for me personally, it came just in the way that I was raised, particularly by my father, around there were no room for errors or mistakes. And that's also what his upbringing was like. And so he's just sort of passing down what he's learned. But in that space of, no room for mistakes, what I learned was that my value and my worth is attached to doing things perfectly. That's when I get the praise. That's when I get the recognition and reward. And that's just kind of like followed me along subconsciously my whole life. But exploring it has been so liberating and so empowering. Doesn't mean that I can just kind of switch from those tendencies to not caring. I think it'll always be part of who I am in some ways, but I'm more aware of it now. And so when I catch it, I'm like, okay, I can understand the patterns and I can give myself a little bit more grace. And I think if we think of veterinary medicine generally, I'm sure there's other professions that have this too. But we see a lot of the perfectionism, which is driven by so many. It's not just, and this is what I kind of want to challenge. Sometimes there's this rhetoric out there that it's like personal tendencies. And I think that might be true to some extent, but the conditions in which we're studying and where we're working are also kind of demanding that perfectionism within us. And so right now in the field, there's a lot of talk about psychological safety. Can I show up and kind of be my true authentic self, make mistakes without that fear of being punished? Well, how do you do that when we also have a lot of people that lean towards the perfectionism? Like, I think it's something that we have to continue to talk about and explore.
API community struggles with this more as well, on top of in vet med?
I mean, I can't speak for all communities. I mean, most of my life has been very much enmeshed within South Asian communities that I've grown up with here in this particular part of Canada. So I see it with my friends, my siblings, my cousins, etc. And it's really pervasive. Like, the connection is really pervasive. And again, I think it's the why, like, where do those tendencies come from? And for a lot of us, it's the community and the familiar pressure to succeed. And it's the trickle-down parenting over generations that just has become the norm. So I've seen it. I don't want to kind of speak for all communities, but I definitely see it within mine.
Yeah, my parents were definitely the stereotypical Asian tiger parents. You know, if I bring home a 99, like, what happens kind of response. So I feel that really hard. Marie, did you have any comments on this subject?
Yeah, I think that I do see that in the Asian American community where I've been involved is the tendency towards perfectionism and my father's an immigrant. I was born in Japan and came to the US as a toddler. My mom is American, so we didn't have necessarily the economic pressures. My dad basically kept his job and just transferred to the US because my mom wanted me and my brother to go to school here, so we didn't have the economic pressures that a lot of other immigrant families had. My dad is also a younger son, so he didn't have all those pressures of being the oldest son, and he could be a little bit more loose, and he could move to another country and didn't feel like he was upsetting expectations as much. So I think that I benefited from that because he didn't have as much pressures, and I don't think he put as much pressure. But I still think that there's a lot of I still sense, perfectionism. I mean, I from the white side of my family as well, but I think there's Japan is more community focused versus individual focused. And I think that a lot of Asian and Asian American communities are probably similar. And so there is a lot of, and I think there's good things because I feel like, then we think more about how what we do impacts the people around us, but it can also go a little bit too far. And then, focusing on, well, what, if I don't do this or that, what will that look like? How will that reflect on, how will that impact, and maybe focusing a little bit too much sometimes on how that impacts other people. And that maybe has a tendency towards perfectionism. So that's just kind of what I've seen and experienced. And I think that I do have that influence from, my Asian American background. And I do think that veterinary medicine also, plays a role in that and encourages that and encourages things that are potentially damaging to the people in the field that we need to work on changing. And oftentimes unintentionally, but that doesn't mean it's not damaging.
Absolutely. How about you, Sharon?
Going back to the perfectionism thing, I feel like when I hear that internal voice in my head, she often has an accent and it sounds a lot like my mom. And so it's finding that balance and sometimes being able to just let go, like of being okay with being okay instead of having to be perfect. And so we have conversations, that voice in my head, and Is it okay to just be okay? Do we have to have this perfect, if it's going to take more time and going to take time away from the other things that are going on in my life? And not just, the personal part of it, is it okay enough to continue on doing other work, because there are other things that are more important. Getting your paper, your email perfect so that you can send it out doesn't have to happen like that if you're sending it to, a coworker, versus if you're sending it to a colleague who you've never met before. You want that a little bit more spot on, but can I abbreviate a little bit more here? Probably. So.
For one more question, again, given to us by Angie, why can it be so challenging to establish boundaries to help achieve work-life balance? Marie, do you want to take this one first?
I think Angie had mentioned this before. Kind of the environment we're in can definitely play an impact on that, and I find that depending on what the people around you are doing and the expectations they're setting, particularly people in positions of authority, can have an impact. So my current practice is definitely good about setting boundaries, and it started with my bosses. We close at lunch, so everybody gets a break for an hour. My boss likes to go out and take a nap in his car, and so nobody gets and I think that's great that he does that, takes that time, and then he's role modeling, like, yes, I'm going to take a break, and I make sure, even if my charts are stacked 10 high on my desk, like I make sure I give myself 20-30 minutes at lunch to just eat and think about something else, because again, I feel like if I can reset a little, I'm going to be better in the afternoon, and that's what works best for me. So I think that creating that environment where it's okay to set boundaries, that it's expected that we have reasonable boundaries, made a huge difference. I have worked in another practice that was not good about setting boundaries and wanted to push everybody's boundaries, and wanted me to come in on my day off to do additional training when I had 2 small children at home, including a baby and a toddler. And I definitely said no to that. That was a definite boundary to me. But that environment was challenging, because when people are constantly pushing your boundaries, and people around you are giving in on their boundaries, and that was the culture of that practice, it was hard to maintain mine. And that's one of the big reasons I left. And when I'm in an environment where people are setting good boundaries, everybody, including people in the management, then it's easier for me to feel like I can set those boundaries, and I can stick to mine. And so I think that that's really important. And again, in vet school, sometimes when everybody around you is pushing those boundaries, or letting go of those boundaries, and then you're expected to let go of your sleep because you're on call, and you got to come in to do help with a back surgery at 2 a.m. I think that it creates a situation where it's hard for us to practice that and then hold to it, especially early on in our careers, when we're used to being on call just destroys boundaries, in my opinion, which is why I don't do it anymore. And then we're all expected to do it. And then there's some people who feel like that's an expectation forever. And so realizing that there are other ways to do things, and environments that are supportive of that, even if it's hard to find, I think that those are important things to remember.
But when I was interim department head here, like, most days I stopped at 5 because I wanted to model for everyone that go home, right? Go be with your family, do your hobbies, like, don't stay here all night. That was very important to me in that position. How about you, Sharon?
I loved what Marie was saying about culture. I think it's really important that you are in a culture that protects those boundaries. Some of the best bosses that I've ever worked with, supervisors, they would say things to me like, go home. You've been here too long. And I really have to put into a mindset of prioritizing that work-life balance, where I'm same age as you, where I'm 53 years old, and I'm kind of from, it's not just a culture, not just an Asian thing, but I think an age thing, where a lot of people my age tend to look at people who set those boundaries, and they get upset with them. They're like, what do you mean you don't want to work weekends? They don't want to work weekends. I get it. It's not always, they have family obligations on the weekends. They have things to do on the weekends. And just coming to that understanding that it's okay to set those boundaries. It's okay to say, I want to do this instead of work all the time. I think that's really important. And I feel like I wouldn't want to work anywhere where the culture was back to what it was 20 years ago, where, I remember times where we wouldn't take potty breaks except for at lunchtime, right? So you're sitting there holding your bladder for 4 to 5 hours, waiting for that time when you could go to lunch, or even getting a lunch. That's the other thing. Like, I love California because you have to take a lunch, or they get a meal penalty. I think that's a really important thing, to make sure that you are taking time for yourself.
So you should have to, drives me absolutely bonkers.
Yes.
What are your thoughts, Angie? Yeah, I mean, you've both touched on all such important pieces here. So definitely like that cultural shift, the systemic shift. We can't just expect people to establish boundaries and then be in workplaces that are not respecting them. So it has to go both ways. I'm also seeing a little bit more in some of the folks that I work with, what happens when I've actually tried to build up the courage to set the boundary and then it gets shot down. I think there's another piece there that, just kind of working with people to increase their capacity to sit with the really crappy things that come from your boundaries being shot down. And like, what we know about boundaries is that sometimes you have to implement them multiple times before anyone hears you. And I'm seeing it in just some of a few of the more recent grads that I'm supporting right now, where it's like, okay, I've built up this energy and this courage to set the boundary. They shot me down, and now it feels like I'm defeated, right? And then it just kind of perpetuates that cycle. And so this is where I think, we need to have people that we can turn to and talk this stuff through, whether it's mentorship or just, colleagues and friends, to kind of help us build up that courage again to do it again. So yeah, the cultural shift is needed. And then I think also people's individual capacity to keep at them needs to be happening at the same time.
Definitely ways that might not get as much pushback as others. So Tina, Natalia, and Krista, do you guys have any other questions for us before we wrap up?
I do not. I just want to say thank you to everyone on the panel and Kiori for your moderating. It was fantastic. I loved it.
Well, thank you. I know I feel like want to hang out with you guys over a glass of wine or something. It seems like it would be a good time. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and hope you have a lovely day. Krista, good luck on your cardiovascular exam. I know you're going to rock it, but no pressure.
Thank you, everyone.
All Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. You guys were wonderful.
Bye.
Bye-bye.